The Fair Claims Settlement Law legislation introduced following Superstorm Sandy. This is a bill that would allow Sandy victims to claim damages after insurance companies have denied them. It's also referred to as a bad faith lawsuit measure. This is something leaders of the Lawsuit Reform Alliance say the state should avoid and instead focus on attention to a federal solution. Joining me now to explain is Tom Stebbins. He's executive director of the Alliance. Welcome back to Capitol Tonight.
Great to be here.
Okay. So is this what, or bad faith bills just generally, give us the definition of what that means?
Well, that gives people a private right of action to sue their insurers for quote unquote bad faith. This particular bill, and the reason we have a problem with it, is that it doesn't solve the problem that it's purported to solve, which is Sandy claims.
Right.
The majority of Sandy claims were flood claims. And as most people know, private insurers don't write flood insurance. It's a federal issue, and most federal insurance is done through FEMA. So the problem should be with, and is with, FEMA. That's why we're proposing a federal solution. This is really a craven example of the trial lawyers trying to take advantage of Superstorm Sandy to line their own pockets.
Is that really what it is, though?
Yeah.
I mean, because I understand where you think the trial lawyers might be, but in terms of the elected officials, let's, for a change, give them the benefit of the
Sure.
doubt and say that they're trying to help people. I mean, the problem after Sandy was, as you know, most people don't have flood coverage,
Right.
and really had a lot of damage and have nowhere to turn, and they're not getting from the state or from the federal government, you know, some promised assistance through programs that were supposed to be more rapid than they are.
But that's the thing, is that that should be through the federal government and FEMA. That was who the responsibility lied with. To say then we need to sue private insurance companies who didn't write the coverage, who don't write the coverage, doesn't make any sense. It's holding the wrong people accountable, not just for Sandy, but also now in the future.
So what you're worried about is if this passes, then it would set a precedent, and then there would be a slippery slope through which...
Well, no, if this passes, we'll see a massive increase in premiums. And California saw this. They did something similar. They allowed private right of action for bad faith, and they saw a 20% increase in premiums. A few years later, they rescinded what they'd done, citing bad policy outcomes.
Okay.
So New York shouldn't pass a law that another state has tried and rescinded, citing bad policy outcomes.
Okay, New York's done that before.
Not to say they haven't, but we shouldn't do that anymore.
But the thing is, though, I mean, are you saying that there is never an instance in which an insurer really is in bad faith? And if in fact that is the case, shouldn't people have a right to sue?
People have lots of recourses. Consumers have lots of recourses. They can sue. They can sue in business court for a policy violation or a contract violation. They can sue in common law. They can alert the DFS, the Department of Financial Services, one of the strongest regulators in the country, possibly the world. They can also alert the Attorney General. So there's lots of recourses that already exist. What this is the trial lawyers trying to put themselves between the regulator and the consumer and get 33% on the way.
Where's the bill?
The bill right now is still in the hands of the Senate. It's still in the hands of the Senate. And it doesn't look like it's moving. With everything being done at the end of session, hopefully it will not move. And that's part of the reason we're here, and we're sounding the alarm and saying, look, this won't help Sandy victims. This doesn't have anything to do with Sandy. That's a flood-related issue. And if we want to prepare ourselves better for floods, we should go to the federal government. We should deal with FEMA. That's where the problem lies. If we pass something like this, it'll only increase premiums, make it harder on the people who have already been victimized by Sandy.
Okay, but so it's past the Assembly is what you're saying. It's in the hands of the Senate.
Correct.
Okay. Now, just the caveat, though, as we've been discussing, is that...
Oh, no, I apologize. It was a different law. I've got too many in my head. This has not yet passed the Assembly.
Okay, so it's in the ether, is
it is
what you're
in
saying.
the ether, correct.
All right, the thing is, though, that, you know, the framework is actually not soup, right? As we're learning today, that, you know, you're having lawmakers who are uncomfortable, and it's still open. As long as things are still open, you still have the opportunity to get things moving. This one is not one that we're hearing about, but that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody won't try to sneak it in under the wire.
Right, and that's really why we're trying to sound the alarm and let folks know that this is not going to help. This is not related to Sandy and shouldn't be related to Sandy. If people want to talk about Sandy-related recourses, they should go to FEMA. If people want to talk about strengthening consumer protections, they should go to the DFS and the Attorney General if we want to do that at the state level. But this isn't the way to do it. And other states have seen that. Other states have data that shows that it increases premiums.
So the last time that you were here, You were in such a fantastic mood. And do you remember? It was
I
after, you don't. Well, you're always in a good mood. But it was, or you seem to be, it was after Speaker Silver, now former Speaker Silver, had had his corruption scandal and then subsequently was forced to give up his leadership position.
Right.
And the reason that put you in a good mood, not that you were dancing on the man's political grave necessarily, but it was because he himself is a trial lawyer and that he had long been seen as a very close ally of the trial lawyers and therefore was holding up a whole slew of lawsuits. That was of legislation. That was the perception that you had. So now
and we had been sounding the alarm saying, look, this income is...
You're sounding a lot of alarms.
I sound a lot of alarms.
You really are.
It's what I do. We had been sounding the alarm saying that this income was really a political donation masked as income.
Yes, well, vis-a-vis asbestos suits, and I want to get there in a second, but before that, so now some time has elapsed. Have you in fact seen a change in the Assembly? I mean, have you seen a difference in the way that bills that you are concerned about that deals with this particular issue are dealt with?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen this on the asbestos transparency front. So we advocate for transparency in the asbestos bankruptcy trusts.
Yeah.
There is none right now. But now we have a Republican sponsor in the Senate, a Democratic sponsor in the Assembly, and I don't think on the Assembly side we would have had that had Speaker Silver still been there. He was, as you know, notorious for being retributive when people sponsored and did things that he didn't like. Now that that burden has been lifted, I think people are really starting to look at the data, look at the issues, see that we're the lawsuit capital of the world, see what that's costing us, and start to try to find solutions.
So have you seen changes then, and I actually know the answer to this one, down in New York City with the asbestos courts, because actually you've seen damages come down. If I remember correctly, you actually saw one particular settlement, which was a decision, I should say, which was massive, be halved.
190 million down to 30 million.
Right.
That's the kind of changes we're seeing. And Whites and Luxembourg had gotten priority, shockingly, in the court system. They had been given kind of first come access, priority access to the court system, which makes no sense. And that has changed. And some of the judges have stepped down. So we are seeing changes in the asbestos courts, and that's great. And we're also seeing a lot more interest in things like the scaffold law. So when you, for example, talk about rebuilding after Superstorm Sandy, we have groups like Habitat for Humanity and St. Bernard Project and other disaster relief groups saying what we really need to do here is not incentivize more lawsuits, but reform the scaffold law so we, Habitat for Humanity or St. Bernard Project, can get insurance.
Okay, but just to be clear, you have less of an impediment, but nothing's actually moving.
That's right, but we're seeing more and more people sponsoring. We're seeing more and more organizations starting to voice their support because they're not worried about that retribution anymore. And so we're really confident going forward that we can really start to see some changes.
Okay, baby steps. We'll have you back, and you'll
appreciate
tell
that.
us when you have some progress.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time.
Great to be here.